Welcome back to my art space. In today's video, I'm going to show you the process of this winter cabin painting. At first I wanted to paint something like this barn, but after doing this sketch I felt it impersonal and a little too simple for my last painting of 2025. And that's why I changed it for this sort of portrait of this small house in the woods. For this painting, I chose to work with a limited palette of 3 pigments, and these are Indanthrene Blue, Permanent Red Deep, and Sepia. And here are the swatch of the colors and some mixes that I use in the cabin painting. Okay, so now let's go into the painting process. I'll start by damping the area of the sky, and I'll apply a light wash of the Indanthrene Blue. I then tilt the paper to have a nice gradient of the sky. I'll paint the forest layer by layer using the wet on wet technique. And I'll start with a less saturated layer of sepia with a little bit of Indanthrene Blue to get a sort of black color. And I'll create the depth of the forest by increasing the saturation of the colors as the layers go by. I chose to work with a limited palette because I've got a lot of new pigments that I've never worked with before, so I thought that doing paintings with limited palettes would help me understand and learn to work with these new pigments. By now, I think I have all the pigments that I need and want, and so in my next video I will show you my watercolor palette that I will use for 2026. So be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss that. Continuing with the painting, I let the paper dry completely, and then I paint the first line of pine trees with a more saturated layer of color. Moving on to the road, I will use different mixes of sepia and permanent red deep with various ratios of pigments and water to create the different colors that I will use in the road. And I'll start the first layer with a wet on wet wash to have a nice cohesive base. While I let the first layer of the road dry completely, I will paint the small plants that pop out from the snow. Now that the first layer of the road is dry, I'm gonna slowly paint the details, and because this is a wet on dry technique, I will use clean water to soften the edges where I need them to be soft. And now moving on to the final part, the actual cabin. For the cabin, I will use permanent red deep and sepia in different combinations to obtain the colors that I'm looking for. And I will start with the same method, a wet on wet first layer. I will let it dry and then continue wet on dry, adding the details. I know I said I would use a limited palette, but I thought that if I left all the lights turned off, the cabin could look creepy or abandoned. So I decided to paint the attic window to make it look like it's lit and that is somebody is there. And as I was painting it, I started to imagine that if this was my cabin, I would have my art studio up in there to look out from that window. If you had this cabin in the woods, what would you have in the attic? Let me know in the comments. I also used a little bit of whitewash to paint the window frames and also to paint the smoke coming out of the chimney to make it a little bit more cozy. So that is all for this winter cabin in the woods with a limited watercolor palette. I hope you enjoyed the process and that you were able to pick up a few tips for your own watercolor paintings. If you have any questions about my process, please drop them in the comments and I will gladly answer them for you. I want to take a moment to wish everybody happy festivities if you celebrate and to wish you all a very happy new year. I have many more watercolor content prepared for next year, so I will see you all in the next one. Bye!